Good evening. This is Talking Sports with Evan. I'm Evan with Allison, and waiting for Kevin Holden to join, but go ahead live now. Going to go ahead and get started with the show. Kevin will join us when he can. But this is Talking Sports with Evan, and a few things to discuss, and I will make sure to ask Kevin about it when he comes into the show. But going to be talking some Milwaukee Brewers baseball. The Brewers are taking one to the chin once again to the Los Angeles Dodgers. They're currently down 3-1 in the bottom of the first inning. They do have two men on after back-to-back walks and a stolen base mixed in there a little bit, but they have two men on and with nobody out. So maybe the Brewers can return the favor that the Dodgers did in the first inning where they got the bases loaded with nobody out, and used a sac fly and an RBI single to give the Dodgers a 3-0 lead. Been rough sledding this week for the Brewers against the Dodgers. The Dodgers are just outclassing the Brewers in every single way. They're just completely dominating the Brewers in every way possible. And as I mentioned, completely outclassing the Milwaukee Brewers. And it's got to be a serious conversation that come playoff time, assuming the Brewers hold off the Cardinals, who are struggling right now, the Pirates, who are tail spinning right now. The Pirates are losers of 10 in a row. The Reds, assuming the Brewers hold them off, the Brewers with a 7.5 game lead in the division. Now they have the bases loaded with a third walk with nobody out. Bueller's back on the hill after missing time with Tommy John surgery, and he has not had a good welcome back to the big leagues thus far. But the Brewers have made the playoffs more often than not since 2018. They have not won a playoff series since 2018. They have bowed out in the wild card round pretty much consistently since. And I guess the question is, watching the Brewers play the Dodgers, who are winners of 5 in a row, and the Brewers are in danger of losing 4 in a row for the first time all season long, being down 3-0. But bases loaded, nobody out. Contreras up the bat. Maybe Contreras does something here. He's been red hot. Maybe he clears the bases with one swing of the bat. So we'll see. But the question's got to be asked. Couple things come Brewer baseball. What is going to be different with the Brewers this year that we haven't seen? Are they going to win a playoff series? And even if they do win a playoff series, if the playoffs were to start right now, they would be playing the Atlanta Braves. They would be playing the Atlanta Braves to open the playoffs if they were to, and the Brewers just hit into a double play, sac fly double play, pretty much. They are trying to get the sac fly. Bryce Terang is throwing out at home, and now the Brewers have 2 outs and now just 2 on. But the Brewers right now were to face. I think that's how it works. Yeah, they were to face the Braves in the first round of the playoffs as it were to start today. And we've seen that. We've seen what happens when the Brewers play the Braves in the playoffs. We've seen what happens when the Brewers play the Diamondbacks in the playoffs. The Diamondbacks, Padres are tied at 69 and 53. Braves currently 63 and 56. And then you got the Mets at 61 and 58. So if the Brewers get through the first round of the playoffs, as of right now, they would be playing the Phillies in the second round if they were to get through the first round. And we've seen what the Brewers do against the Phillies, too. Philly took the Brewers' lunch money and then some. At least the Phillies pitching staff against the Brewers' offense. They just couldn't score that series at all. And it's kind of sad because I enjoy watching the Brewers play. But and maybe I'm just pessimistic after being at the game last night, watching them lose, watching them down 3-0 currently with 2 on and 2 out, and they're about to go through yet another inning of getting people on base and then not getting anything to show for it. That's what we're in the process of showing about to happen right now. So, do the Brewers stand a chance in the playoffs? That's kind of what I want to talk about. Do the Brewers stand a chance in the playoffs, assuming they make the playoffs? As of right now, I think the Brewers have a good shot in the wild card round of the playoffs. And coming in now is well, give him a second to get settled, but Kevin Holden from CBS58. But the question I'm having right now, Kevin, and I was kind of talking about before you came in, as I'm watching the Brewers once again losing to the Dodgers 3-0. Do you have any confidence that this year is going to be different in the playoffs that we have seen in the last couple of years?
Wow, that's a really good question, because that means that I would have to feel differently about some part of this game, this team's game, if it's pitching, if it's hitting, if it's whatever. And I've got a lot of confidence in the hitting. Sorry, I'm just settling in here in a we're in an audio booth. Check it out.
Oh, okay.
Fun, right? Yeah, I like what this team is doing from a youth standpoint on offense, the aggressive style, all that sort of thing. They have been remarkably slump proof. Like, a baseball season has some slumps, but a young team will tend to have, extended issues, and they really haven't. The problem is pitching is just it's not where it's supposed to be for the Brewers. And unfortunately, even the plans they had before the season just have not panned out. The guys like Jacob Junis and these guys they signed before the season, even Joe Ross, those starting pitching plans had not mapped out. And so you've got like Tobias Myers, filling a spot in the rotation, and he's been good. I mean, you can't argue with the results of it, but I don't know how I feel about a playoff series if we're talking about Tobias Myers trying to go beat the Dodgers or the Phillies in October.
Yeah, and I think the Brewers are the only team left in baseball that has not had a 4-game losing streak. Likely going to change tonight the way the game started out. They get the bases loaded, nobody out, pop fly to center, Trang thrown out at the plate, and then the third out happens and nobody scores. So we'll see if they can come back and win. And Buehler's a little erratic early on, walking the first 3 batters he's faced. I'm sorry, but I don't know. They played really well against the Dodgers. The Braves. They did pretty well against the Reds, even though they lost one of those games. But you see him against the Phillies, you've seen him against the Dodgers. They seem to, and I don't know if it's a youth thing, and maybe get your perspective there. But when they play the elite teams, quote unquote elite teams, they seem to make uncharacteristic mistakes. Joey Ortiz had an error on the second pitch of the game, got Ohtani on base to start things off. They made errors in Philadelphia earlier this year. They just seem to play uncharacteristic and make uncharacteristic mistakes whenever they play very good teams. They can't make mistakes as it is playing a team of the Dodgers caliber, but they seem to always make them. Is that just part of the youth issue then too? Is maybe the moment's too big for them?
It may be just not enough experience against some of those higher end teams, because there's definitely a talent discrepancy between the upper portion and the lower portion of Major League Baseball. And the Brewers can do some things, against some of those lower teams, although they will occasionally hiccup against those lower teams. But yeah, I think youth is probably a good part of it, because you're trusting very young players without a ton of big league experience, to try to treat a moment like it's a playoff moment. If you're talking about this week of games at American Family Field, it feels like playoff baseball. You've got the Dodgers for 4, you've got the Guardians for 3. Those are teams that could easily play the Brewers in October. Obviously, if it's the Guardians, it's the World Series, and we're all dancing and celebrating. But it's a tough bit of experience for a young team like that, because you got to stay focused on the moment. And the other thing to remember about younger players is these guys are everyday guys at the big league level, and they haven't played this number of games. The Major League Baseball season is incredibly long. It's longer than the minor league season, and certainly longer than collegiate and other seasons before it. So there is a fatigue factor, I think, that fits in. Young bodies can adjust pretty well to it, but it doesn't matter who you are. 162 games is a grind, and I think facing these teams later in the year, that may be part of what it is, right? Is you all of a sudden, after all this grind, 4 months of grind, you have to find the best you in those big moments, and sometimes that can be tough to do.
Yeah, speaking of young players, guy, I want to ask you about, get your thoughts on 20 years old, not even able to buy a beer in the state of Wisconsin yet, but he can definitely hit the baseball extremely well. As Jackson Chourio kind of had a bit of a struggle early on, but since the first month of the year seems to have been playing better and better each and every week. What are your thoughts on him and just what he's able to do at the big league level at such a young age?
Everything that I've seen so far from Chourio indicates that contract was a pretty good idea. You know what I mean? He's that young, but what he's got in terms of raw skill, what he's got in terms of that swing, the just raw abilities that he has, the speed, everything else, you're looking at a superstar. And Pat Murphy has done, I think, a very good job of not overloading Chourio at such a young age. It would be tempting, I think, if the Brewers are putting so much money around one guy as a franchise guy, it would be tempting to trot him out there in the 3-hole and every night. And if he slumped, just, let him continue to play. But Murphy has had him in the 8, the 9. He's batted him in some of the top spots in the order as well. But there are days where Chourio's batting at the bottom of the order. And I think that's helped him get adjusted to a taste of the big league life and then the daily grind against big league pitching. And I think that's been a good thing. But I think Chourio's got a chance to take another step forward, even within the scope of this year. I think it could happen this year, where in September, October, some things might click for him, and I think he might step up to a bigger level. I will not be long before he's a guy capable of carrying that lineup, and you see little bits of it right now. But I think there's a step forward for him even before this year's over.
Ohtani draws a walk, and kind of questionable walk. I think the umpire fooled Contreras. He was about to throw the ball around the horn and ends up calling ball 4 instead of strike 3. So Ohtani's such a tough out. Like, I don't really know how you even get him out consistently. I don't think anybody does. But back to Jackson Chourio, you saw it in last year in the minors. He would go to the next level, struggle a bit, get it, and tear the baseball. I'm glad Murphy was patient with him. And I know, because I do work for the Brewer, 620, the home flagship station of the Brewers, and I produce the post-game show usually on the weekends with Dominic Contronio, and we would have people texting and calling the show all the time when he was struggling. You got to send him back down to AAA. And I'm glad that he didn't, because I think it's the experience he's gained working through those early struggles, I think, is going to help him become a bona fide superstar. So
yeah, Murphy's done, I think, a good job going back to spring training. I think he's done a good job of managing the beginning of a superstar career. You remember back in spring training when we were there those first couple of days before they even got to the first spring training games, they were handing out jerseys, and the idea was Chourio was going to get the 11, right? But at the last minute, they put 94 back in there. They put I think it was 94, his spring training jersey, his old jersey in there. And Murphy said, look, you're going to have to earn that 11 just like everybody else. And I thought it was an excellent message to send early on, that if he works hard, things are going to work out for him. But you have to work hard. You have to stay in that mode. And that was the beginning of it for me. Murphy had a game plan for him, and it's worked out pretty well. And the interesting thing is, Pat Murphy's skill set is really well suited to Chourio and to this young team, because Pat Murphy was a very successful college baseball manager for a lot of years, Arizona State, Notre Dame. he understands how to properly motivate guys of that age. Churio's 20. That's a college sophomore or junior, depending on the situation. And so Murphy has managed plenty of 20-year-olds to success in his career. So he was, and I don't know if that was in the process for the Brewers, their thought process when Craig Counsell left, but he is uniquely qualified to deal with those players because he's done it for a lot of years. And I think the success that the youth has had on this team goes directly back to Pat Murphy, and it shows you how much he meant in the years before he became manager. I think we just couldn't see it as much as we do now.
Yeah, I made the comment in the past on the show, and to some friends who are also Brewer fans and some Cub fans too. I think Murphy had a lot more to do with Craig Counsell's success in Milwaukee, and I'm not trying. I respect everything Counsell did during his time in Milwaukee, but I think Murphy had a lot to do with his success in Milwaukee, being the bench coach. Is there was somebody that he could lean on and help him make that tough decision? Where Counsell is the analytics guy, he could turn to Murphy, who's more of a old school guy. And when you have to make that old school decision, it could definitely help. And I don't think he has that in Chicago, and I think we've kind of seen it a little bit.
Yeah, Counsell is, again, like you said, Counsell presided over an unbelievable era of Brewers baseball, and I hope fans long-term don't forget it, even though the short-term sting of his going to Chicago is not fun. But Counsell did an awful lot. But Craig Counsell, years after years here, all the years that he was here, you heard, experts and fans talk about how players liked playing for him. And I think maybe that's the thing that I amend a little bit. It's not that players didn't like playing for him. I'm sure they did. But I think that players liked playing for that coaching staff. I think they liked the idea of Murphy, who was relatable, who's funny. You can tell he can help keep you loose at a tight moment. Is compassionate. He understands the situation. Versus Counsell, who will hit very many times hit the right buttons and get the right players into games and, have a strategic advantage. So I think, the combination, you're right. It was a big part of what the success is. And, Counsell in Chicago is a different animal for a lot of different reasons in my mind too. One of them is, the Cubs don't worry about spending what they need to spend. They're not concerned about that part of it, where the Brewers are much more thrifty when it comes to free agents, when it comes to, all those things. Right. It's amazing, right? The difference between the two. And I think Counsell is suffered a little bit because he could do a good job of making things work when the hand wasn't ideal. And down there, that's not an option. The hand has to be ideal. You have to, he has to have a winning hand right now in this situation. And it hasn't happened for him. And it's a tough place to be. They can tolerate it this year. But if the Cubs end up with a losing record this year and again next year, those voices are going to change on the north side.
Yeah, one thing we don't see a lot of in Chicago is patience, and I think they'd be pretty quick to pull that trigger. Kevin Holden, CBS58, Sports Director, joining. Appreciate you coming on. Well, Bryce Turang's no longer second in baseball in stolen bases. Ohtani both tied and then took second place from him in this last half inning. Thankfully, it didn't matter. They got out of it. But when you look at the Brewers pitching, you talked about the pitching staff a little bit. I want to kind of talk about the trade deadline. Do you think there is more they could have done, or was a Savelli, a Keiko, even though he's now gone, and Frankie Montas, was that the best they could do?
I mean, it's the trade deadline is always that decision, this gut decision about what your team is and what it's capable of, and what you want to do short term versus long term with it. And the Brewers, in all honesty, for the last couple of years have had a little extra layer around what they do at the trade deadline after what happened with the Josh Hader trade that blew up chemistry in the clubhouse. It was clearly an issue for the team that ended up missing the playoffs. They were a first place team when they traded Hader, and they were out of the playoffs by the time October rolled around. So I think sometimes when something like that happens, there can be some extra added pressure on the moves that you make. Meaning if you go too big, if you try to compensate the other way, you may end up hurting yourself for the future. But if you continue to not make moves, then that could be a problem as well, especially with a team like the Brewers that needs pitching. They were looking for cheap answers in the rotation, clearly, and they were looking for veterans for those roles, right? Like all three of those pitchers, Savali, Keuchel, and Frankie Montas, kind of fill this a very similar kind of role. Pitchers who've had some success in the past, who are currently, struggling with whatever things. With Montas, it's an injury. With the others, that Keuchel has gotten some age on him, and that's part of the issue with him. But they made those efforts, so they could absolutely have done more. But it's not one of those things that I like, plant the flag and say, this is over because you didn't do more. I think they probably pursued those avenues. We heard the rumors of Jack Flaherty being available but costing an awful lot, and I think the Brewers did what they could do within their constraints, financially, and what they have for the future to try to help out. But I'm glad they didn't blow up some major part of this team, because the hitting especially is going to be around for a long time. There's a big chunk of this that reminds me of like 2007. Is there 6 or 7 when all the young hitters came up and all of a sudden the Brewers were young and fresh top to bottom, and then once they got pitching, they started making the playoffs.
And I think it's safe to say they do have pitching too. Mizorowski is continuing to develop. Now he's coming out the bullpen in Nashville. I know that people are trying to read the tea leaves stating that that's a surefire sign he's going to be out of the bullpen this year for the Brewers. But I think it's more on trying to limit his innings a little bit to get him more work, because I don't think they want to overwork him. And then there's another reliever. Not exactly sure how to say his last name. I don't know if it's Yuhu or Yohu or what. He's been striking out a lot of people too. And if Robert Gasser can come back from his Tommy John, he looked impressive before that. They got the pitching too that can possibly come together as well. And Brewers are on the board now thanks to home run Bowers. But Bowers is like a Rob Deere. He either hits a home run or he strikes out. To me, he's like a Rob Deere. I know you weren't covering the Brewers yet when Rob Deere is around, but I'm sure you remember. I'm sure you know the name, being a baseball guy.
It's Rob Deere is one of those guys from back then that would be a much more valuable player in today's game than he was in that game, because low average, high homer guys weren't frowned on in the early 90s, but they were kind of like, okay, that's your game, fine. And now the pressure to hit for high average is gone. If you hit for power and you hit 220, it doesn't matter. Like it's all over the place, right? So it's funny. I'm aware of Rob Deere for sure, and I feel like Rob Deere in this game, because he is a good fielder with a good arm too, in this game in 2024 would probably have signed a bigger free agent contract than he did at his time.
Couple quick more things about the Brewers I want to ask you about. Then we're going to switch to the a little bit further north than Milwaukee, up in Green Bay. Yelich back just seems to continue to be a problem. He finally got the production back at the plate we've been hoping for. This year, he looked back to his MVP form. It's kind of been coming together the last couple years, but that back just continues to be a problem. Is that just something Brewers have to deal with, like Ryan Braun's thumb, where Braun just couldn't grip the bat with the thumb? Is it just Yelich's back is just going to give him problems from time to time?
I think that's probably the future. And the fact that Yelich had dealt with back issues over the course of a couple of years, and he always kind of took things in stride. He was trying to, he took the time, he would take it or whatever. But this last time with this last injury, he felt the mood was much more grim, And I think that's the idea, is that for one, surgery is going to be in play for him at some point. And the other half of that is, I don't know if he's ever the same after that. And it's not a problem for Yelich. It's a problem of modern science. As we haven't been able to figure out the mysteries of the back. You can fix other maladies and issues and injuries and bring people close to 100%. Backs are a little different. And so I think that after that surgery happens, it's going to be a question of what is still there. Is the bat speed the same? Is the leg speed the same? Is it, what slides backward for Yelich after that happens. I think the one thing that Yelich proved to me this year before the injury was that he was one capable of being a very good baseball player. MVP is probably a little bit of a stretch for this Yelich pre-injury, but very, very good. And he had no trouble taking on the role of uh, the leader, the mentor, the sort of tone setter for the team. You know, he's done things in 2024 that we've never seen him do. We had a Telemundo broadcast earlier this year, and Yelich laid down a squeeze bunt, and I'm like, okay, first of all, is it 1984? But also, man, that's an incredible statement, because the other guys, the young guys, can say, if this dude's laying down a bunt for the team, I got to do the same thing. And to me, that was where Yelich's value put him over the top before the injury, was good statistics, really good leader. And I thought that that's the unfortunate part. If he's still there, you know, he can help them out, but it's different when you're a leader in the dugout as opposed to on the field.
You mentioned how the players were feeling around how he was sounding, and how the team and management and all that was sounding when, you know, they had to put him back on the aisle with the back. Do we see him again this year, or is his season done?
I would think.
Your gut feeling.
Yeah, my gut feeling is that he'll make a valiant effort at something, but you're in mid-August and there's been no talk about it at all. And I think if he makes that effort, he'll do it in another 3 or 4 weeks. And you're talking about a narrow window. I think he just wants to be good enough to give the team something as deep as they play, regular season, playoffs, whatever, before that surgery hits. So I think it's a car that's close to breaking down. And you make a decision at some point, right, when you have that car, to just put it on the road. And at some point, it's going to be on the side of the road. And he's hoping to not have that happen until the season's over. But yeah, my money is a little less than 50-50 that he gets meaningful at bats the rest of the year. I'd say 30% maybe that he gets meaningful at bats the rest of this year.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat you are. I'm hopeful to see Yelich and the Yelich that we saw between back injuries again, but I've never had a back injury probably as severe as what Yelich is dealing with, but I've had back issues, and they take a while before you just feel comfortable enough to even work out again, let alone swing a bat and sprint to first base and whatnot and run the field. I can't even imagine how long it takes to get comfortable doing that. So Packers had their first preseason game. I think we probably saw all of what we need to see from Jordan, like all we're going to see from Jordan Love. And LaFleur has kind of hinted at the starters being done now as well. Do you think the starters needs to, when I say starters, I mean your Jordan Love and company, do they need to get more action in the preseason, or is it just get the work they need to get done during the joint practices and get them ready for Brazil?
I don't think it's necessary for them to get what they need within the scope of the preseason game. I think it'd be nice. Don't get me wrong. I still think there's something to be learned from it, but I think the NFL players approach, the typical players approach, if you're not trying to make a roster, if you are safe on a roster, is the joint practices mean a little bit more than the preseason games do. Eric Stokes talked about this. We were in Green Bay yesterday. We asked about the idea of playing, in this joint practice out in Denver, and he said, I love them. I love the joint practices, because you still see looks from the defense. They can give you what they want, but they could do that in a preseason game too, right? Like the Broncos defense, or offense in his case, could throw out their best looks and their best guys, or maybe not, right? Maybe they save some stuff, but you have to make adjustments. And I think players have found that joint practices are pretty good ways to get ready for the season. The adrenaline is certainly there. Like a lot of these preseason practices either end in fisticuffs, or there's a little dust up here and there during these practices. So they bring some intensity to it. Selfishly, because we do these preseason games on Telemundo, I want to see the starters. But let's just say that I have done significant research on the second, third, and fourth stringers, because I know that's pretty much what most of our night to all of our night is going to be, both this Sunday and then Saturday as well.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about the broadcasting on Telemundo, but I kind of want to get to the the Packer stuff first. Anything stand out to you, good or bad, during that first preseason game?
Well, it was nice to see, Jordan Love comes in, throws the 65-yarder, walks to the sideline. Everybody's good. Uh, as far as, you're looking at guys that are flashing, right? That are trying to make an impact out there. And there were a couple of guys that stood out to me. Robert Rochelle is one, and I have nothing other than my eyes to tell you, right? I don't know what his stats were from that game. I think he had a pretty good game. Uh, but Rochelle seemed like he was everywhere. Like he just it didn't matter what position you had him in or what the situation, the formation, any of it. Rochelle was all over the field. And I think that's a perfect kind of guy to complement the guys that are already in that secondary. Xavier McKinney's going to make that secondary better. But a guy like Rochelle just gives you more depth and energy. And I think he's going to be, he's not a superstar, I don't think, but he's going to be a guy who's going to help out tremendously on the defensive side. Lucas Van Ness had a good game. And that was a guy that LaFleur talked about earlier this week. I can't remember if it was Monday or Tuesday, but he mentioned that, Van Ness was not a starter at Iowa before he was drafted. So Van Ness needs reps. That's the kind of guy here in the preseason who can benefit from stuff in games. Van Ness is going to play. He's going to start. He's going to be a big part of that defensive unit. But the more reps he can get in a game, the better, because he just hasn't had starter reps. He didn't have them in Iowa, and year one in the NFL is a bit of a wash for a lot of guys. So those two stand out to me. Van Ness and Rochelle on the defensive side. Offensively, I think Emmanuel Wilson he's a guy that is in the right position, meaning he's going to end up getting a ton of carries just because he falls exactly on the depth chart where a running back is going to get carries in a preseason game. What he does with it, I don't know. I think there's talent there for sure. But Emmanuel Wilson is a guy that whose name we will be calling a lot here in the next couple of weeks for sure.
And I hate asking this question because I personally like AJ Dillon. I think he's a great human. Does everything you want him to do from inside the locker room standpoint on the field, but he clearly has limitations. With you mentioned Emmanuel Wilson, they drafted running back Lloyd this year. You signed Jacobs. Is it an uphill battle for Dillon to make this roster? Because I don't see the Packers keeping 4 running backs unless Lloyd's hamstring is more long term than we think it is. Dillon might be the odd man out.
Yeah, you raise a good point. I think it would be a mild surprise and nothing more for me if Dillon didn't make the 53. It would be like, oh, okay, interesting, because like you say, the room is a little packed with bodies. That running back room is, and the Packers only have so many slots. I mean, you would love to be able to keep everybody on your 90 man that you have right now, but it doesn't work that way. And they're going to need those positions for other, those slots for other positions on the field. So it's entirely possible. I think it would be a little bit of a shame. Dillon has enough experience that I think that could still help the cause. He and Jacobs could be the vets, and the other guys could be the youngsters, and you could work with it. But like you said, the math means if you keep 4 running backs, you keep 1 fewer of something else. And I don't know if they want to do that at other positions on the field. So it may be a numbers game that keeps Dillon off the 53. I'll go a little over 50% that he makes the 53. A mild surprise if he doesn't.
Yeah, the things that Dillon does really well that guys like Wilson or Lloyd still have to develop is you're going to have to be a blocker for Love. You have to be pick up blitzes, which Dillon does well, and he's sneaky good coming out the backfield catching passes. And to me, he just needs to show more when he has opportunities running the ball. I know the short yardage situation it's tough in a regular game to get that yard just because everyone is ears back attacking that line of scrimmage. But he that's kind of what his role needs to be, and he clearly didn't do it in this game. And I feel Dontavian Wicks, by the time we get to the playoffs, assuming the Packers make the playoffs again, it's kind of going to be that. I'm not going to say wide receiver one because they don't really have one, but I kind of feel he's going to be that wide receiver one. Do you think he takes that leap, or is there a different receiver you feel that takes that leap that kind of becomes that top guy?
Yeah, that goes with the first team out there. Wicks seems like a good candidate for it. Jaden Reed, I thought, was just so impressive down the stretch last year, and I'm curious to see if we'd see any flashes of anything from him here in the preseason in these next couple of games, or even in training camp practices, that sort of thing. Dobbs and Watson are obviously right there at the very top, and you've got a group of other guys that have a little bit of experience. What's weird about it is the Packers receiver room was so young last year. They're still young this year, but they're young in a different way. They've experienced everything in an NFL season. And, they always say with NFL rookies, by the time you get to week, 13, 14, they're not really rookies anymore. So those spots are going to be tough, to step up and claim, because there's so many guys now who've been there who are right back into the mix this year. But, I saw the group of cameras around Grant Dubos's locker yesterday, and I was like, yeah, man, it's a tough situation, right? There have been years where Grant Dubose might be able to sneak up and do a little more than he can do here in 2024. It's a deep group, and like you say, someone's got to come to the surface, because Love is only the upward trajectory is only continuing, right? It's only going to get better, and that means the Jaden Reeds and the Dontavian Wickses and these guys of the world are set to put up good numbers and be contributors. Even if they don't change a thing. Love is that much better.
Yeah, the whole argument about we need a wide receiver one, is that, to me, that argument's extremely overrated. I would rather have 4 or 5 very good wide receivers, and if Christian Watson stays healthy, he can take over a game, in my opinion. Then, like, we saw it in Green Bay with, and not trying to be disrespectful to Devontae. I love Devontae Adams. But we saw it in Green Bay with Devontae Adams that Aaron Rodgers would force feed Devontae Adams even when there's 2, 3, 4 guys around him. And I think that stalled the offense a little bit. Do you think the whole notion that we must have a quote-unquote number one receiver is a little overrated?
Little bit in this case, right? There are some teams that you could look at and say, look, they could use a leader, a number one guy, a number one option to make the defense, kind of change things around, focus more on that guy, open things up for other guys. But the Packers' success is more in quantity in this case than anything. If Dobbs is on and Watson is on and Jaden Reed is on, and you got running backs blocking and catching a few passes out of the backfield, it makes the defense work hard to try to stop all those options. In all honesty, I think I could say the Packers need a tight end one more than they need a wide receiver one. If they had a tight end one that jumped, if Luke Musgrave jumps and really becomes a huge impact guy at tight end, I think that changes things too, right? You talk about a possession type of guy, a guy you can throw to keep the chains moving, and you can play a little more than with your other receivers and change routes and that sort of thing. I think that extra option would make it really difficult for a defense. If you got 3 or 4 good receivers, a good running back or 2, and a good tight end all catching passes, that has that feel like it used to be when the Packers were 15-1 that year when Jermichael Finley was still in his prime. I thought he was an impact guy then. That would be an excellent thing for the Packers to have now if Luke Musgrave could find his inner Jermichael Finley.
And if he can't, well, Tucker Kraft's going to find his inner. I don't even know who to compare him to, but he's just a tight end that seems to be able to do it all. Last offseason, it was Aaron Rodgers, the darkness retreat. Will he be traded? Will he retire? This offseason was Jordan Love's contract situation. Are we actually going to be able to have a normal offseason, you think? I know I'm looking into the future here, but do you think we're actually going to be able to have a normal offseason this coming season now that Jordan Love's locked up and there seems to be nobody coming up next for that next contract?
Yeah, every offseason will have, here's a list of free agents, here's a list of needs, we'll talk draft. Like, every offseason will be busy for the Packers just because there's always stuff.
We just want normal.
Right. Yeah. If we could just sit here and have, debates about college picks and who's best at number 20 whatever where the Packers will be picking versus trying to have greater conversations about ivermectin or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it just that realm is outside my realm. I mean, no matter how or what you believe on that effort, I don't think you can ask a sports expert to necessarily be an expert on all these other things. And it was a bit of a challenge. So I will be greatly relieved if I don't have to do that, in the off season to come. And I don't think we will. Jordan Love under contract seems to be, in a great position. These Packers are as loose as I can remember them in August in a long time. It's a narrow window for me, obviously. I'm in Milwaukee. I'm not in that locker room often. But what I've seen, there's a different kind of closeness with this group, and that to me is where the big difference is. You have in any season you have a couple of guys who end up sort of breaking from the mold. Even last year, Devondre Campbell was dealing with his stuff at the end of last year, and you had some of those dissenters that were going in the other direction. I don't sense it this time around. I think it's a young group, a group that's well together, and that's fine. Because if you and I can just talk football, that makes me happy.
And I brought up to Jordan Love because of his contract, this situation all offseason was, when's he going to sign? Does he have to sign by training camp? Does he have to sign by this day? When's he going to sign? Do you sign him? Do you force him to play another year? And now he's under contract now. And I want to mention that Jordan Love thing. You are the sports director for CBS58. The news comes down that he signs that extension, 8, 9 o'clock ish on a Friday night. What's that sports room like when that news breaks? Probably an hour and a half before the 10 o'clock news starts.
That was an absolutely fantastic thing to happen. I'm going to have to change locations here. Give me a quick second. We've got some folks that are needing this space. So I'm going to, oh, you're right. I'm going to make a change. I'm going to go out here. You guys do what you got to do. Sorry. Oh, you're right. No worries. So sorry, we're going to change spots here. But, okay. So when that happened I'm going to have some light in here. When that happened at 8:30 on a Friday, dude, I was all smiles. It was absolutely thumbs up material, and I'll explain why. Because there's a difference between how a fan experiences a story and how a media member experiences a story. First of all, it's right before the start of our newscast at 9 o'clock on WMLW. Absolutely fantastic. We can break that news. You know what I mean? We can get there and put that story on the air. It's a Friday, so you don't have to worry, and it's late at night, so you don't have to worry about a lot of other distracting factors, right? You can just sit down, put your video in, write your scripts, go out and do the show. And plus you have some teeth in your show, right? Like you can actually sit down and, analyze, all right, Jordan Love is, he's signed. You don't have to worry about the drama of all of this anymore. And it happened before it got too bad where it would become a daily thing. Like there was a little bit of, all right, why is this taking a while? Is he going to sign or whatever? But I think most of the people involved knew that it was a foregone conclusion. He was going to make it. So it was helpful, right? That didn't drag into the second week or the third week. Or what if it's family night, right? And Love is not on the field during family night, or he's standing on the sideline, and then those images come out. And, I think there was a chance, if it dragged out, for it to be more dramatic than it needed to be. And because it happened when it did, it wasn't dramatic at all, which was wonderful. And he was right back in pads the next day and ready to roll. That was good for everybody.
Another reason why it was good, it happened at 8:30, right before your 9 o'clock news, and then your 10 o'clock, is you didn't get off the air. You wrap up the news. Have a good night, everybody. Talk to you tomorrow, and then it breaks. Then it's like we just got done with the news, and now it broke.
I a great example of that. I've got one of the best examples of that around. Mike McCarthy got fired at 6:01 on a Sunday, or 5:58 or whatever it was on a Sunday. And the way it works for the local TV stations is everybody is out of their shows at that point. Like in our case on CBS58, we have a 5:30 newscast on Sunday, but it's done at 6:00. So we were at Lambeau. The Packers were playing the Arizona Cardinals, if I remember right, early
Yep.
December. And we did the last of our live reports from Lambeau Field, tore everything down, got into, there's this room where you have all the gear, right? So we went in to grab all of the gear to leave. And with gear attached to both shoulders and over my head and everywhere else, I look down at my phone and I just yell out, "Hold up." And the whole room stops. And I'm like, they fired McCarthy. And so all of a sudden, everybody's day changes. But the problem is we don't have the immediacy on our side to be able to do that right away. We can put it on social media, but there's no show until 9:00. There's 3 hours, So that was the downside. If it happens at 5:58 or 6:01 or whatever, then it just becomes a bit of a mess.
Yeah, I'm glad Jordan Love and his agent and the Packers took into consideration the members of the media for that deadline and announcing it.
I don't know if they did, but I'll take it.
I'm sure Goody was trying to figure out yours and the other sports people around Milwaukee and Green Bay's calendar into account.
Yeah. Oh, Holden's in tonight? Yeah, go ahead. We'll do it now.
Well, I could talk to you all night, to be perfectly honest. I appreciate you coming on this show, get your perspective on the Brewers and the Packers. I know you got a show you got to get prepped for, but I do appreciate you coming on. And any obviously people can find you on CBS58 for those sportscasts. Any place else that people want to follow you on social, anything like that? Where can they go?
You can follow me Twitter or X, if you will, at 321Q Kevin, 321 CUE Kevin. I'm all there on social media, but the shameless self-promotion that I want to do, if it's okay, is about this Sunday. We have 2 games happening on the same day on Telemundo. We do, you mentioned the Spanish stuff. So I call Sunday afternoon home games for the Brewers on Telemundo, and then we also do Packers preseason on Telemundo. Well, they're both on the same day this Sunday. So I never dreamed that I would live in a world where I'm going to call a Major League Baseball game and an NFL game in a foreign language on the same day. But it is about to happen. So we're at American Family Field at 1, and then the Packers play in Denver at 7. So the joke is we need a really fast jet. So if you can find a really fast jet, you might want to let me know.
I'll look into that. So just no touchdown Brewers during the broadcast.
I guarantee you
Packers.
it's going to happen where I'm, so somebody breaks into the open field and I start yelling about Bryce Terang, during the Packers game. It's going to be wild. And the amount of prep that you do for these broadcasts is really crazy, especially the Packers. Like Brewers, we follow day to day, but Packers preseason has all these guys you don't know. So, you learn, the play-by-play guy's job is to learn all this knowledge about 40 or 50 guys that you probably don't know much about. So that's going to be the wild thing, is calling that baseball game and then sort of throwing that out of the brain and pulling in the research and everything for the football game.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Appreciate you coming on. I will definitely try to find the Telemundo broadcast to catch that as well. But I appreciate you coming on. Will be another Talking Sports with Evan next week. Make sure to look out for that. Going to be Tuesday or Wednesday, more than likely. I hope you all have a great rest of your night, great rest of your week, and I will, if I can get my mouse to work, talk to you all later.
Thanks, Evan.